So in an ideal world, this would be the 7th installment of my 50 books challenge videos, but I believe it's actually the 5th because I fail at making videos. I didn't make one for June. So I'm very sorry about that, but I'm going to cover June and July in this video. So without any further ado or whatever, let's get on to books. First book that I read in June was Harry Potter and the Prison of Azkaban, which this may have been the last book I read in May. So if I said this already, I'm sorry, but I didn't think to go back and look before I started this. So I think you all know how I feel about Harry Potter at this point. It was my goal to get through all the books before the movie came out, but I didn't. This is the last one that I read, so yeah. The second book that I read was called A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man by James Joyce, and I thought it was very good. I enjoyed it a lot, except there was this part in the middle that was like, he was Catholic and he was at this Catholic church, and there was like a whole fire and brimstone like speech that lasted for like 100 pages, and it kind of made me lose the will to live. I could have done without that part, but otherwise I thought it was pretty good, pretty interesting. If you want to read it, it looks like this. The third book I read was kind of silly. It was called My Best Friend, the Atlantic Ocean, and Other Great Bodies Between Me and My Life with Julio. It was silly. I sometimes like to read silly books, especially after I read a lot of serious books, like A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. But I don't know, if you're like 11, or if you like silly books, you can check this one out. It looks like this. The next book I read was called The Stranger by Albert Camus, and I thought it blew my mind. Like, seriously, if you haven't read it, it's just crazy, like, crazy. I thought it was such an interesting, like, I don't know what the word is, but it was just, if you haven't read it, I don't want to spoil it for you, because it's really fascinating to read how he's so, like, apathetic about his own life and, like, just doesn't care. And so if you haven't read The Stranger by Albert Camus, it's like a little teeny book. It's not a hard read. Well, it's like, makes you think, but it's not long or like really hard or anything to read. So I would recommend that you read that a lot because it will blow your mind. It looks like this. The next book I read was called The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. And pretty much, if you haven't read The Hunger Games yet, you live under a rock, because it is so, so good. I really like the post-apocalyptic kind of literature, and it's pretty much like that, and it's just so good. Like, I couldn't put it down. That hasn't happened to me in a while, that like I was so into it that I just couldn't stop reading. I would highly recommend it if you're into young adult literature or post-apocalyptic literature or books in general, because it is a delightful read. It's not exactly pretty all the time, and sometimes it's downright scary, but it's amazing. It's about like a post-apocalyptic society where like each state, it's kind of like states in America, except it's not America, has to send a young person like 11 to 18 or something to go fight to the death on television. Like, it's awesome. I would highly recommend reading it. If you want to, it looks like this. The next book I read was called Everything is Illuminated by Jonathan Safran Foer, and if you remember, I read Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer earlier in the year, and I had high expectations because I thought Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close was so good, and Everything is Illuminated was pretty good. I didn't like it quite as much, but it's still, he's like such a good writer, so it's still like a good read. So if you would like to read that, you can look for this cover. The last book I read in July was called The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And technically I was supposed to read it for my psychology class, but it's a book that I've been wanting to read for a while, and it definitely lived up to my expectations. It didn't feel like schoolwork at all. It's by Mark Haddon, and it's quite good. It's interesting. The main character is autistic, or some like high-functioning autistic. They never really say exactly what he is, but it's just so interesting to read about how he thinks and how he sees the world, and like how his mind works. It's just fascinating. It's also very engaging. It keeps you interested, and I thought it was quite a good read, and I would highly recommend it to anyone, whether you're interested in psychology or not, because it didn't feel like a psychology book. If you want to read it, it looks like this. There's also other covers. Pretty much all the books that I show have other covers probably, but this, I just show the cover of the book that I read. So yes, it's cool because it has a little cutout of the dog. Like, it's not just black, it's like a cutout, which is neat. Just kidding, that wasn't the last book that I read in July. Surprise! Actually, I kind of just forgot. But the actual last book that I read in July was The Host by Stephanie Meyer. My lovely friend Christina lent it to me, because we both read Twilight, and she had already read it and she owned it, so she let me borrow it. Yeah, shoot me, whatever. I like Twilight. I enjoy reading it. I don't think it's like magical literature of awesome. It's just entertaining. I know lots of you would probably attack me for this, but I like to read it. They're engaging books and they're nice, fun stories. I didn't like Breaking Dawn, however. But shoot me, I like Twilight. Whatever. I hate Twilight fangirls. Actually, that's the worst part of Twilight. But yeah, so I was kind of expecting The Host to be similar, and in a lot of ways it was similar, in that the main characters, kind of, are really smitten with ridiculous boys. But it was just really, really long. Like, it was huge. It took me a long time. It's like 600 pages long or something. And I just felt like it went on and on and on and on and on and on forever. And there was like 7,000 different climaxes, which was like ridiculous. And I kept waiting for it to be over, and it just wasn't. And I just think it was too long. That's all. I think she could have managed to put it across the same idea in a shorter format that wasn't so ridiculous. So I wasn't as impressed with it as I thought I would be, but it was still interesting. Like, the situation was interesting, and some of the characters were interesting. So I guess if you like Stephanie Meyer, it's maybe a good read for you, or if you like aliens, it'll probably be a good read for you. But if you're interested, it looks like this. Okay, so that's for real all I have to say this week about books. I hope everyone out there is reading, and if you're doing the 50 Books Challenge, let me know how you're doing in the comments. And even if you're not doing the 50 Books Challenge, leave a comment, because I love getting comments. So I will see you guys in August with my next list of books that I've read. So yeah, I'll see you then.